1, 2. 1, 2. All rise. Good morning, everybody. Can follow the normal procedure and ask the former president to confirm that he's still under oath.
Do you confirm that you're still under oath? Say I do.
I do. Thanks.
Advocate Jafas.
Thank you, Commissioners. My clients welcome the opportunity to cross-examine Mr. Mbeki. Mr. Mbeki, just on the outset to explain the position of my clients who have criticized in public portions of the arms deal, if I may call it that. It's not that they don't recognize the responsibility of our democratically elected government to make decisions, including security-related matters, which are to be for the benefit of all South Africans, which they feel the government had and still has a responsibility to make sure that we break from our painful apartheid past. However, the question is, and that is what I'm going to try and explore with you today on behalf of my clients, is whether the decision to proceed with the arms deal on the scale and in the manner which this country did was rational, given the sad legacy of our apartheid past. Now, I would like to start with the first issue, and that is, you said yesterday that the decision to buy 29.9 billion rands worth of arms was approved by Parliament. Can you perhaps just explain again to me why you said that? Your rationale for saying so.
Chairperson, I said what went to Parliament was the defense review, with which Parliament agreed. Thanks.
So do I understand you correctly? Your statement is that the defense review and the acceptance of the defense review by Parliament was, in fact, a decision by Parliament to approve the arms deal. Is that correct?
It was approval of the defense review. That's what Parliament did.
Well, perhaps I should take you to the defense review itself. Copies of it will be given to you, but I'm quoting from the defense review itself. And it says the following, and I'm referring to the defense review, paragraph 8 of chapter 8, It says the approval of a force design by the Parliamentary Defence Committee.
I'm sorry, Advocate Force. Can you just allow time to locate the correct pages? It's on page?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I wasn't aware of the fact that the first bundle has already been given out. It's page 5 of the first bundle. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It says here that the approval of a force design by the Parliamentary Defence Committee, Cabinet or Parliament does not constitute a blanket approval for all implied capital projects or an immutable contract in terms of the exact numbers and types of equipment. At best, it constitutes approval in principle for the maintenance of the specified capabilities at an approximate level. Do you care to comment on this paragraph?
No, I don't know, Chairperson, why I should.
Mr. Mbeki, perhaps I should take you to the paragraph 74 in the same chapter. You'll find it on page 7 of your bundle. It goes on to say that chosen force design option will become the object of implementation planning for the next decade or longer. However, the realization of this force design will be influenced by periodic revisions of the Defence Review and subsequent planning to reflect the continuously changing strategic environment and prevailing circumstances. And perhaps the most important, the result is that the exact details regarding the type and quantities of main equipment will inevitably deviate from this vision. Such deviations will be subject to parliamentary oversight and stipulations of the acquisition process. Now, I put it to you that there was no parliamentary oversight after the decision of the Cabinet taking in November 1998 to proceed with a 29.9 billion arms deal. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I hope I heard the question, Chairperson, but the Parliament indeed exercises oversight over the executive, and I would imagine that they would have exercised oversight over this particular decision of the executive.
Mr. Mbeki, I was under the impression that the Constitution required government to get permission for spending of money from Parliament, and that's what normally happens by proposing a budget for the year to come and getting Parliament to vote in favour of the budget, not so.
You are quite correct, Advocate, and that's exactly what government did.
I couldn't find any reference to the amount of 29.9 million rand in any specific budget. There was no specific entry asking permission from Parliament to spend nearly 30 million rand on arms.
The government presents a budget to Parliament on a yearly basis. And that budget covers the entirety of government expenditure. The government doesn't go to Parliament on different days to present different budgets for different departments. This debate about departmental budgets arises after the presentation of the overall budget by the government, which was done in this case.
I will leave it. It's a matter of argument, but my clients will give evidence before this commission that there was no proper approval by Parliament of this particular deal, and that it should have happened in view of the requirements in the Constitution. But I'll leave it at that. Mr. Mbeki, in the Defence Review itself, and you don't have to go there, you will remember that the Defence Review visualized the budgetary allocation for the defence to be 40-30-30 ratio for defence spending on personnel, operating and capital costs after the transformation process is completed. Do you remember that?
No, I don't. I haven't read the defense review for some years. But it may very well be saying that.
Do you accept that that's the position? Because the document is attached to your bundle. I don't want to go to the document every time. It was decided to be 40-30-30 in the ratio as I explained. Do you accept that?
Advocate, you said the defense review says that. I said that I don't remember it. I haven't read it for a long time, but it may very well be saying that. I'm not questioning it.
And as if one reads the defense review, it is clear that the vision was that the 30% for capital expenditure was supposed to be for the entire total expenditure of the SANDF per year. And I put it to you, that is exactly what the defense review says. You will find that in the document I've given, and do you accept that proposition?
The government accepted the defense review. So I think this answers this question.
Now, Mr. Donaldson gave evidence before this commission, and you'll find his evidence on page 14 of the bundle before you. And if you look at table 3, that is contained in his evidence, and I will just read it to you, you don't have to go there. It shows, and I submit that it is clear from this table, that the arms deal absorbed a substantial portion of the defense spending. In fact, in the years 01, 02, 02, 03, 03, 04, and 05, 06, the arms deal alone absorbed either close to or over 30% of the defense budget that was identified by the defense review for capital expenditure. Do you accept that?
Chairperson, this is what is being reported. That was said by the senior official from Treasury. I'm sure that if he said it, he said it. I don't know why I must accept it or reject. I'm not Treasury. I haven't done any of these figures. I accept indeed that that's what he might have said.
Mr. Mbeki, perhaps I should just explain to you what I'm trying to do. I understand that you do not at this point in time have the detailed knowledge that you perhaps had 16 or how many years ago, and even then perhaps all these figures were not available. But the fact of the matter is that certain decisions were taken based on certain facts. I'm putting those facts to you now, and I'm asking you to explain the rationale of the decisions that was taken. So that's why it's important for me to take you through the various facts that you based your decisions on. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm showing you that the defense review said 30% of the budget should be spent on capital costs. That's the first point. Secondly, that expenditure, the 30%, was basically used up by the arms deal. And this brings me to my point. That means that for the years that the arms deal was implemented, there was no money left for the rest of the capital costs of the South African National Defence Force. That's my point. And do you accept that? Because that's exactly what the figures show.
I don't know what the figures show, Chairperson, but what I know is that there was never an issue raised that other sections of the National Defence Force were short of whatever capital that they've needed, the army or the medical services. I can't recall that there was at any point that any of the services said they needed particular capital expenditure, and it was said, no, it can't be financed because of what had been spent on this particular acquisition. I can't recall that.
Mr. Mbeki, it's got to do with the question whether the decision to spend this amount of money was rational. That's why I'm asking you this. if the government decides we will put aside 100 rand a year for capital expenditure, and they then take the whole of the 100 rand and spend it on number A instead of B and C as well, clearly there was no money left for B and C. And the question is whether this was a rational decision. That's all I'm asking you. If my proposition that I put to you is correct, I'm saying to you that my clients will argue it wasn't a rational decision.
Chairperson, I'm sure their clients are perfectly at liberty to argue that. The decision was rational, and I'm saying in the consequence, I can't recall any of the services within the National Defence Force which ever said that there was no money to finance whatever capital needs that might have needed.
Mr. Mbeki, your reference to the headlines, can you perhaps explain that to me?
The what?
You referred to the headlines. I didn't follow what you were saying there.
I didn't say anything about any headline.
Sorry, I didn't understand your answer. I've just been assisted by my attorney. Thank you. Can we, for a moment, just stay with the defence review, Mr. Mbeki? The defence review and the prevailing defence policy at the time of the SDP indicated that the greatest threats to the security of South Africans was not of a military nature, but of poverty, unemployment, and high levels of crime and violence. You will remember that Mr. Hoffman asked you yesterday who were the enemies of the country. Well, we have read the defence review, and the defence review specifically states that the real enemies of South Africa at the time was poverty, unemployment, and high levels of crime and violence. Do you accept that?
Chairperson, the government accepted the defense review. So, of course, it's possible, it's quite allowed for the advocate to quote any section of that defense review, but the answer will be the same. The government accepted the defense review.
From that, it follows logically that if the greatest threat, as is said in the defense review at the time, to the security of South African citizens was unemployment and poverty, then it means that any state decision that could potentially worsen these social skills would decrease rather than increase our human security in South Africa. Is that correct?
Oh, I'm sure that's logically correct, yes.
There was mention made yesterday of the affordability report. Portions of this report is attached to your bundle. This report was presented to the Interministerial Committee at some point in 1999. And I just want to refer you to the report itself. Just bear with me for a moment. Now, Mr. Naidu gave evidence before this commission, and he said that the affordability study had two objectives. The first was to assess the macroeconomic fiscal...
I'm sorry, Advocate Force. Is there perhaps attached to this document, and if so, on what page, on this bundle that you gave us?
No, I'm not referring to a document. Mr. Naidu's evidence is on record, Mr. Chair, and I'm reading from his statement. I don't think there's going to be an argument. I try to limit the documentation to issues that may be in dispute. I don't think this is going to be an issue. I'm just placing this on record for Mr. Mbeki's to assist him, because obviously he hasn't read the report in a while, and it's perhaps good just to revisit the purpose of the study. Mr. Mbeki, according to Mr. Naidu, the affordability study had two objectives. The first was to assess the macroeconomic, fiscal, and financial impacts of the expenditure on armaments. And these issues addressed in this respect was whether the procurement would create undue pressure on the South African overall economic performance as measured by the GDP growth, employment levels, external economic position, and the government's financial position. And the second objective was to analyze the risks involved in the procurement. The number of risks of the procurement were identified in the report, and according to Mr. Naidu, they contain the following. I just want to refer you to the following. The first risk was an increase in domestic interest rates upon the announcement of the packages, then the non-performance of offset commitments, the more rapid depreciation of the rand exchange rate than assumed, and any economic shock that the announcement may have had on the economy. Can you recall that these things were discussed and debated in the Interministerial Committee?
The affordability report was not provided by Mr. Naidu, but by the then Minister of Finance, Trevor Manuel, and indeed we discussed it.
I accept that. I'm just using his evidence to explain, perhaps in easier terms than the affordability report reads, what was presented to you. But if you look at the affordability report on page 15 on the documents that was given to you, that is paragraph 3.3.5 and 3.3.6, there's a discussion precisely on the two key risks, and that's the increased interest rates on the back of the announcement of the STP and a failure of the NIP obligations to materialize in full. Those were the two key risks identified. Now, if you look at page 16, paragraph 6.1.1 and 6.1.2, the following is said in the executive summary. The proposed defense procurements are distinguished from other government procurements by 4 key characteristics. The sums involved are extremely large. They involve fixed contractual commitments extended over long periods. They are heavily import-based, and their costs are offset by a set of associated economic activities, the NIPs, which cannot be guaranteed. These characteristics create a set of important and unique risks for the government. The analysis of these risks suggests that as the expenditure level increases, these costs associated with the major risks escalate. Ultimately, the decision about expenditure levels really constitute a decision not only about government's assessment of the needs and benefits driving the procurement decision, but about government's assessment of the risks. Now, I'm sorry about this long quote, but it is important. And what I'm going to say, Mr. Mbeki, is that this suggests that there was a high degree of risk involved in pursuing the arms deal. What is your comment on that statement?
Chairperson, I was saying that the Interministerial Committee and indeed the Cabinet discussed this report and accepted it. Didn't say we accept paragraph 1, paragraph 2, and it accepted all of it. Thanks.
So I accept then that you accepted that there was a high degree of risk involved in the process in pursuing the arms deal. Is that correct?
I'm saying the government, Chairperson, accepted this report.
Why did the committee decide that the high risk or high degree of risk is something that they are willing to accept? On what basis that the Cabinet and the Interministerial Committee believe that they can be comfortable with such a high risk, especially taken South Africa's peculiar socio-economic situation into account?
Yeah, obviously, because the government thought it could manage the risk.
Now, if one looks at the total unemployment between the period of 1995 and 1999, and you'll find that on pages 38 to 42, it's taken from Statistics South Africa. It shows that there was an increase of from 1 point...
Just hold on, can we get to that page?
Page 38, I did mention that, to 42.
I think everybody's got that page. You can continue.
I can be more specific. The one I was going to say, put it to Mr. Mbeki, that the unemployment nearly doubled between 1995 and 1999 because it increased from 1.8 to 3.2 million individuals. You'll find that on page 42, bullet 3. Is that correct?
I don't know what you're asking. What is it that is correct?
That the Statistics South African document shows that there was a doubling of unemployment in that period. That's all.
Oh, sure. I'm sure that's what it says.
Now, if one considers this statistic, Mr. Mbeki, our clients will argue and they will submit that for the government to have pursued the SDP, which the Affordability report found could have dire economic consequences, was irrational, especially in view of this particular statistic.
Chairperson, I'm sure quite free to discuss that, but they would have to show a causal link between that and unemployment. I don't know of any. Thanks.
Now, Mr. Mbeki, the Affordability report did not make provision for a study of opportunity costs. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term opportunity costs.
The last time I studied this, I was doing a junior degree many years ago. I'm familiar with it from that point of view. That was in the 1960s, Chairperson.
I only found out about opportunity costs when I heard evidence of Mr. Naidu. But it seems that what was done is nobody, when they did the affordability report, there was no specific study done about what else could have been done with some of the money or all the money in terms of socio-economic upliftment. And the question simply is, why wasn't that also considered?
Chairperson, as I understand it, my colleague Alec Ewin gave evidence about this particular matter. But more broadly, I'm not quite sure what the question implies, that perhaps if we had not bought ships for the Navy, that would have been better because something else would have happened. What then happens with the Navy? It means you take a decision. You close down the Navy. What's the opportunity cost of that? So I don't understand how you do use this concept in this particular way, but I'm saying that in any case, this matter was dealt with by my colleague, Alec Ewin, who spoke for all of us, for the IMC on this particular matter.
My question is simply this: why was opportunity cost not a consideration? Because it's not only about, with respect, Mr. Mbeki, it's not only about buying corvettes for the Navy. It's about the amount of money that was spent. It is about deciding whether the Hawk should be bought or the Aermacchi or whatever that aeroplane was called. That's the point I'm trying to make. So all I'm asking is, why didn't the Interministerial Committee and Cabinet at least just have some kind of comparison between opportunity costs and the costs of this particular purchase?
What is meant, Chairperson, by opportunity cost? as a little bit of economics I did. If she could explain to me what she understands by opportunity cost, then perhaps I could explain this.
The Chair can just give me a moment. I just want to find my note. Mr. Mbeki, I'm not an economist, so I can't explain it to you. All I'm going to put to you is the evidence before this commission by Mr. Naidu. In his statement in item 10, subparagraph 3, he says the following. The affordability study defined affordability in terms of the capacity of the economy to absorb the overall costs of the exercise, as well as the possible increase in cost levels which might occur if the associated risks were experienced. Affordability was not defined in terms of the concept of, and he quotes it, opportunity costs, unquote, that is, the possible alternative uses of the funds on meeting other policy objectives.
Chairperson, this matter again I'm saying was canvassed by my colleagues in the IMC. And they were representing a point of view of the government and of the IMC. I've got no position that is different from them. Even this thing about risks. Indeed, there's a paragraph there which addresses the matter exactly, that government therefore had to assess how it manages those risks. And government, this is this paragraph 622 on page 16. The issues on which decisions are required are the appropriate level of expenditure for the entire procurement and so on and so on. All of these things, whether to accept the opinion as option, on a combined package of Hawk and Gripen, or whether, etc. So I'm saying that the government applied its mind to all of these things, as is reflected in this report. And as I said yesterday, as to the matter of course, there are no decisions were taken by the IMC or cabinet which excluded cost. None. As indeed the whole procurement was discussed in the context of what are the other national challenges. And I know, Chairperson, the commissioners, that this particular matter about government expenditure was dealt with quite extensively by Minister Trevor Manuel and senior officials, Donaldson from Treasury. Exactly to argue this, that even at the height of our defense spending, we still ran a budget surplus. So, indeed, the government looked at the entirety of this thing as it must. It's a government. It's not a government of a particular department or its entirety of government. So it's got to look at the entire program of government, and that was done, including what are the costs of whatever program. The discussion we're having, Chairperson, would apply to anything, and absolutely anything that you do. We say, look, we need to increase expenditure on primary education. So you're going to say, what implication does that have in terms of building clinics? It's a necessary process. That's what happens normally. And that's what would have happened in this particular case, as indeed was explained, I'm sure, quite extensively, both by the former Minister of Finance and Treasury officials.
Mr. Mbeki, the point I'm trying to make is not whether we have had a budget surplus in later years, but at the time when the decision was made, whether there was a rational reason for the decision. And that is one of the instructions to this commission, to look at the rationale for the decision. I'm not implying that the decision was made because of any kind of corrupt dealings on behalf of the government. We are dealing with the first question that must be answered by this commission, and that is the rationale for the decision. The reason why this is why we are discussing what we are discussing is to look at the rationale at the time. And whenever I'm saying what you decided or didn't decide, I'm obviously referring to you, Mr. Mbeki, in conjunction with the cabinet and the interministerial committee. I'm just asking your personal views and what you can remember what was discussed and why the decisions was made. And I'm debating the rationality of that decision with you. That's all that we are doing here.
Well, certainly as government, we thought the decision was very rational.
Well, perhaps then we should turn to Appendix B of the Affordability Report, titled Summary of Outputs from Macroeconomic Model. You'll find that on page 26 of the documents before you. What you see there is the figures that were calculated as per the macroeconomic model used to estimate the impact of the SDP, and the figures are broken down into baseline figures, that's without the SDP, figures related to expenditure on the SDP without the two negative scenarios contemplated in the model, and figures related to expenditure on the SDP with each negative scenario model, and figures related to the scenario in which the two risks identified came to fruition. And this was to assist the decision-making process and to assist the risks. Do you see that that is what the figures show?
Certainly that's what they do. Get a reflection of the fact that the government was seriously applying its mind to this issue.
Well, let's look at that. If one turns to the second box of figures, the headline is GDP annual growth, real percentage. We can ignore the figures for the middle and low scenarios because we know we in the end went for the high expenditure
Just
scenario.
hold on, I'll wait for us. Thank you. We can proceed.
Thank you, Commissioners. I don't want to read the figures to you. I just want to make the following statement. If you look at the table, it clearly indicates that even if none of the adverse scenarios materialized, the GDP growth would have been reduced by at least 0.1% against the baseline in years 6 to 10. Can you see that? It further indicates that all the adverse scenarios, if they all had materialized, the GDP growth would have been at least 0.5% less than if the arms deal had not been pursued. This is one of the risks that the government thought wasn't serious enough to reduce the expenditure on this particular arms deal. Is that not correct?
These tables, as I understand it, commissioners, reflect different scenarios which the people who were preparing this particular affordability study thought were important in part of the process of applying their minds before they make recommendations. So, therefore, because there are different scenarios, you would say, well, if we're this scenario, what would happen? If we're this other scenario, what would happen? So, I mean, that would be a normal process. So, that's what happened. So, that's what happened.
Well, perhaps I'll rephrase the question. I'm going to say to you that the figures that was presented in the affordability report showed three things. It first showed that even in the best case scenario, the GDP growth would have been reduced by 0.1%. It further shows that the budget deficit would have increased in the best case scenario by 0.1%. And most importantly, it shows that as far as employment is concerned, even in the best case scenario, the SDP would have only created 1,000 jobs. And I can take you to those figures if you want me to. The fact of the matter is that the decision was taken in spite of these negative indicators. And that's what I'm putting to you. There were negative indicators, and in that context, it makes it difficult to understand why the decision was taken.
Chairperson, let me repeat this. All of these matters were canvassed here by then Minister of Finance, and I'm sure that people asked him questions about it. And the positions that he took are the positions I take, because those are the positions that were government positions, not individual positions. Thanks.
Well, according to the figures that was given to the Interministerial Committee as well as Cabinet, on the best scenario, only 1,000 jobs would have been created. The question is, why, Mr. Mbeki, did you agree to release information that suggested that the arms deal would create 65,000 jobs? That's the question.
I think what we need to remember is that there was also work done on the NIPs and DIPs, and that produced its own particular outcome with regard to the issue of job creation.
Mr. Mbeki, as far as my knowledge is, and I'm going to get instructions on this, the figures that I've quoted to you included the NIPs and DIPs figures.
Sure, you should do that, but I'm sure they don't.
No, shall we continue with this? They do. But I will, after the tea adjournment, show you to the correct places where I can convince you that they do include the NIPs and DIPs. But perhaps we should continue with the cross-examination until I get to that. The point that we really are trying to make, and I think that my clients will give evidence on, is that if any of the negative risks came to fruition, it would have meant that a number of jobs would have been lost, and that obviously, given the warning of the Defence Review document, would notably have decreased security in South Africa instead of increasing it. And the question is, why did the government think that this was an acceptable risk to take?
Chairperson, I'm saying the government took a decision on this matter in the context of everything else in the country, and decided that this decision was correct to take.
Mr. Chairperson, the fact that I don't continue with the discussion with the witness does not mean that my clients accept his proposition. I just accept that sometimes I'm not going to get the answer that I'm looking for. So I don't know if you want me to put that to the witness every time.
Not necessarily. I suppose as a cross-examine, you always don't get the answer that you need. That I accept. And of course, the clients are at liberty to testify on any other issue that they think is relevant to our mandate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Can I... If the chair can just give me a moment. Nee, ek wil vir iets anders sê. 10.3. Now, I'm sure Mr. Mbeki, at the time of discussing the affordability of the project, the question of the cost estimates and the two different bases that was used was discussed by the committee at first and then by cabinet. The first basis in the affordability report assumed a rand exchange rate fixed in August 1998 and to calculate a nominal, or what was called a cash price. That is the cost as if a single payment were to be made at the date of signing. The second cost estimation basis calculated the real cost by taking into account the expected rate of depreciation of the rand, exchange rate over the repayment period, as well as the inflation differential between South Africa and supplier countries. The result were then discounted in the presentation of the cost to cabinet by the Interministerial Committee, and eventually the statement that was made to the rest of South Africa, the cash price was used as the reference, namely 29.9. Obviously, the real costs were considerably more, and according to my instructions, it was just over 36 billion. The question was, why wasn't the real price or the real cost used in the decision-making process and or the announcement that was made to the public?
Excuse me, so I apologize. Can she please pose that question again? Just a question.
Well, perhaps I'll put it differently. In the presentation of costs to cabinet, I was wrong there. In the presentation of costs to cabinet, both the nominal cost, that's the cash price, and the real cost were included, but when this announcement at the time of the cabinet decision was made to the public about the amount of money that was going to be spent, only the cash price basis, which is obviously unrealistic, 29.9 billion, was used. The question is, why wasn't the real cost used in the announcement?
The government announced what it decided this thing would cost. If somebody else has got a different calculation about how much it would cost, of course, that's their business. But it announced what it thought this thing was going to cost.
But Mr. Mbeki, according to the affordability report, the real cost to government would be in the region of 36 billion. So why wasn't that was the real cost? The question of a cash price wasn't wasn't reality. It wasn't going to be 29.9, and the government knew it. Why wasn't that information given to the public?
I'm saying that the government announced what it knew had to be paid in terms of this acquisition. And that's all, Chairperson. And Trevor Manuel, in any case, dealt with this thing again. And people had every opportunity to ask questions about this particular matter because it's also a budgeting matter.
Well, nobody had access to the affordability report, which showed the real cost.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sure the witness can help you with that. He's no longer in government. He doesn't know what documents you're referring to. He doesn't know where that document is. I'm sure he cannot help you with that question.
Chairperson and my learned colleagues' clients had access to the affordability report even before it was declassified.
We note that.
Commissioners, I'm going to leave it at that, but my argument and the point I'm trying to make and trying to get Mr. Mbeki to explain to South Africa is why, at the time when the announcement was made, the government knew that the real cost would be 36 billion, but instead they chose a fictitious number, 29.9 million, in the announcement, in the announcement to the public. That's all I'm asking. It's a very simple question.
Mr. Mbeki, I'm sure you hear what the Advocate Force is saying. It says government chose a fictitious figure when they made the announcement. Do you want to comment?
The matter that would arise in that context, Chairperson, is that obviously you know that you have to pay interest. And number two, the exchange rate might move and you don't know in which direction. Now, what I'm saying, that the government announced what it knew it could budget for with certainty. But of course, government knew that there might be additional costs that would arise because of the matter of interest rates and foreign exchange, the foreign exchange rate, and which we didn't know whether it was going to move up or down. So now to compute these, which will carry in future, I don't know why there would be an insistence on that.
Mr. Mbeki, it was computed and it was contained, or it is contained in the affordability report, but I'm not taking this any further. Let's rather move on. I want you please to look at the question of offsets, which, as you know, and perhaps you can help me or correct me if I'm wrong, the question of offsets were quite an important part of the arms deal. Is that not correct for South Africa?
Yes, they were part of what had to be considered.
I asked whether it was an important part of the packages.
All elements of the package are important.
If you look at Mr. Mbeki, will you please look at paragraph 3.3.3.9 of the affordability report on page 24 of the documents before you. It says the following: it is naturally more difficult to obtain evidence of unsuccessful NIP processes, since it is not in the interest of either supplier or purchaser to reveal this information. However, it can be concluded that the implementation of offset agreements does indeed take place to some extent, but it remains unclear what proportion of commitments is actually achieved, and it is doubtful that full delivery is ever achieved. Now, my question to you is, do you agree that this paragraph indicates that it should have been doubted by government that the important part, namely the NIP process, would probably not be 100% achieved?
This matter, Chairperson, as you know, has been extensively covered. Here, NIPS, the former Minister, Alec Ewen was here, and people from trade and industry dealt with all of these things. I certainly don't have anything to add to what they said.
Mr. Mbeki, I'm asking you as a witness at this commission to tell the commission what you can remember were discussed about the risks, the obvious risks that the NIPS had in this whole process. That's what I'm asking.
I don't know how many times I must answer this question, Chairperson. I've said both the IMC and the Cabinet discussed this affordability report, all of it, accepted it. With regard to the issue of NIPS, I'm saying that whatever is said in this paragraph, which government accepted, in the practice, we then had to deal with this matter, and it was dealt with in detail, and evidence was presented to this commission in detail by the former minister and the officials at DTI about this matter. So I'm saying, Chairperson, we accepted the report on affordability. So it doesn't matter what paragraph you come to. If it's in the report, it's in the report. Thanks.
Well, perhaps, Mr. Mbeki, then we should turn to what your colleague, Mr. Alec Irwin, said before this commission, and you will find that part of his evidence in your bundle on page 61 to 62, if you want the opportunity to turn to that part. The paragraph reads, "This illustrates that the NIP is essentially a form of commercial partnership where the obligor and the DTI, on behalf of the buyer, are attempting to achieve differing objectives. The obligor wants to maximize the, quote, credit dollar, unquote, with the minimum amount of money it has to put forward, and the DTI is trying to maximize investment with no real interest in who supplied the investment. In theory, for the obligor, the maximum amount of money that it would be prepared to pay in is what it values as the economic rent of being the equipment supplier. For the DTI, it wants to maximize investment and other objectives, as I will later deal with, but it cannot push this too far, otherwise the obligor will seek redress in finding means to increase price over the life cycle of equipment in order to secure its required profit level." Well, perhaps, Mr. Mbeki, since you align yourself with Mr. Irwin's evidence, do you care to explain what you understand with this paragraph?
The paragraph speaks for itself, Chairperson. Thanks.
Well, our interpretation of this is that what Mr. Irwin was suggesting is that the DTI knew it could never achieve a full realization of the NIP commitments, as the suppliers would simply increase their maintenance and support costs to cover this cost. Do you agree with that interpretation?
No, I don't. What this paragraph is saying is it's describing very accurately, the balance between these two parties in this kind of negotiation, that this is the kind of balance that you'd meet. So if I was asked to go and go and negotiate offsets, I'd be very pleased to receive this advice. And that's why I'm saying it speaks for itself. It says in negotiations of this kind, this is the challenge that you are going to face, and it is correct.
Mr. Mbeki, my clients don't agree with you. My clients say that this statement indicates that the state could be held over the barrel post-delivery on the basis of the escalating life cycle and maintenance costs levied by the suppliers. What is your comment to that?
Your clients are perfectly at liberty to disagree. That doesn't mean they are correct. Of course they can disagree.
Mr. Chairperson, I want to move on to a complete different field. May we have the tea adjournment now, please?
Maybe let's take tea adjournment. We'll be back after 20 minutes. Thank you.
All rise.
Do you confirm that you're still under oath? Say I do.
I do.
Thank you, Commissioners. Mr. Mbeki, may I take you to the meeting of the 31st of August 1998. That was a meeting of the Interministerial Committee, which you chaired, and I think it was held in Durban, and you, in your evidence in chief, mentioned that you couldn't remember the detail of that meeting, but you do remember that there were certain recommendations that was made and that certain decisions were made by the committee. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean what's contained in the memo with regard to the particular specific items of equipment that were ultimately recommended to Cabinet, that indeed was the situation.
You are aware, I'm sure, of the evidence of both Mr. Esterhuizen and Mr. Steyn, who were present at that particular meeting, that they cannot recall that a specific decision has been made as far as the preferred bidders are concerned.
Well, I can't contest that, Chairperson. If they can't remember, they say they can't remember, they can't remember.
I'm sorry, maybe let me just correct the position. Both of them said that they left. They say that, there was a discussion, there was a presentation, and after the presentation, all the officials left. Mr. Steyn initially said that he's sure that everybody else left and the ministers had an urgent meeting to attend to. He later on said that he could not remember when he was confronted with his Section 208 statement. So all the evidence that we have up to now, including Mr. Steyn, is that when the ministers met, all the officials had left. That is my recollection of the evidence of Mr. Steyn.
Chair, I've looked at the statement by Mr. Esterhuizen, not his evidence, but the statement that he filed. And in the statement, that's where I got the information from, that there was no decision made. But I accept the Commission's recollection. If it's necessary, I can always revisit it. Nothing turns on it.
If at all nothing turns on it, then we can leave it. If something's going to turn on it, I was going to ask Advocate Campbell. She's the one who dealt with those witnesses in detail. And I can still remember. I think at the end of the day, what we gathered from those witnesses was that when the meeting of the interministerial meeting took place, they had already left. And I think even Mr. Kazler confirmed that there was that meeting where those decisions were taken.
And what would happen in any case normally, Chairperson? Cabinet committee meetings like the IMC and Cabinet itself, ministers would come and present reports, but by the time the ministers take a decision, there are no officials there. That's normal. That was normal practice.
Mr. Mbeki, according to the minutes of this particular meeting, the minutes indicate that the officials were present during the presentation and the discussion. That's neither here nor there. I don't want to argue about this particular issue. What I want to talk about is at this particular meeting, two very important decisions were made. And the one was to buy the Hawks instead of the Aermacchi. And the other one was the question of the tranching options as far as the Gripens are concerned. And those are the two things I would like to discuss with you. Can we perhaps first have a look at the question of the Hawks? Mr. Hoffman, when he cross-examined you, put to you that there was a no-cost option and a costing option, and that was unconstitutional. But perhaps if I can take you to the slideshow that was presented at this particular meeting by Mr. Sheikh, we can discuss this with the facts at hand. We will find that at page 220 of the bundle before you. Can I go there? This is only part of the slideshow, and the part that we included here deals with the lead-in fighter training, or the LIFT program, which has to do with the question of the Hawks. If you turn over the page, you'll find the evaluation results, and I'm just going to read to you the heading: Program Lead-in Fighter Trainer, Quantity 24, Mil Value Excluding Costs. Can you see that?
Advocate Foster, on which page is that?
That's page 221.
Yes, I can see that.
So it would seem that part of the presentation made by Mr. Sheikh to the committee at the time was evaluation excluding costs, not so.
Learned Commissioners, may I please interject with one small issue that does need some clarification. There is no evidence, as far as I'm aware, that this particular document was in fact presented before the Ministerial Committee. And whether it was or not, whether it was or wasn't presented perhaps needs to be established first, perhaps via the witness or on some other basis, as you please.
Advocate Foster.
Just give me a moment, please, Chair. I just want to find the passage in Esterhuis's evidence where I found this information. Chair, I'm going to refer you to Mr. Esterhuizen's evidence and specifically Wally's statement, specifically page 36, paragraph 5.6 thereof, where he refers to the special ministerial briefing on the 31st of August 1998, and he says the following: a special interministerial committee briefing session took place on the 31st of August 1998 in Durban. I was present at this meeting. Deputy President Mbeki chaired this meeting. Mr. Sheikh presented overhead transparencies of the SOFCOM findings, brackets, Annexure EE16. Now, the document I'm referring Mr. Mbeki to is a part of Annexure EE16, and I assume that this evidence was given before this commission.
But I think Advocate Kane seems to be raising a different point altogether. He says he's not sure whether is this particular document that was presented at that meeting, as I understood it.
Learned Commissioners, I accept my learned friend's submission in this regard would constitute a sufficient basis then to put this to the former President. She has resolved my difficulty. Thank you.
Mr. Mbeki, can I now once again just refer you to that page and show to you that there was two options presented, or two evaluations. The one was no cost, and you will see on the right-hand side, eventually, there's a best value figure indicated. The Hawk earned 100 points, the Czech Republic 86.3, the Aermacchi 87.5, and the other party 74.6. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Now, if you turn over the page and you go to page 220, there's the value including costs. Oh, sorry, 222. That's the value including costs. Page 222, it's just over the page.
Yes, I can see that.
And here we see that the Hawk scores 96.5, whereas the Aermacchi scores 100 points. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So first of all, your evidence yesterday that there was never any proposition or any evaluation proposed excluding costs is not correct. Is that right?
I'm afraid you are misrepresenting what I said. What I said yesterday was that neither the Interministerial Committee nor Cabinet ever considered anything without taking into account cost. And I'd repeat that.
Now the question is the following. If cost is excluded, it shows that the Hawk scores 100 and the Aermacchi scores 87.5. But if costs are included, it shows that the Aermacchi clearly wins the race. The question is whether the difference in price between the two justified, or the difference in what the government perceived to be between the Hawk and the Aermacchi in terms of performance justified the amount of money that was spent on the Hawk. And that's what I want to ask you.
The answer is yes, Chairperson.
Now, according to my instructions, the difference in price between buying the Hawks and buying the Aermacchi was $400 million. Will you accept that, or do I have to take you to a passage in the documents?
Well, Chairperson, if you say so, it's all right. I don't mind. I don't have to go through any document.
And according to Mr. Esterhuizen's evidence, the performance of the Hawk was only 15% better than the Aermacchi. Do you accept that?
If I don't know whether it was correct or not, I have no technical capacity to assess whether what he said was correct or not.
Sorry, it was I made a mistake. It was Mr. Steyn who made that, who gave that evidence. But let's accept for the moment, this commission accepts that Mr. Steyn was correct, is that in terms of performance, we're talking about 15%. But in terms of price, we're talking about $400 million. I'm asking you again,
I must interject at this point. It is not in accordance with the evidence to put that, and if my learned friend does want to persist with it, I would respectfully request her to locate the passage from Mr. Steyn's evidence so that I may consider it in context.
Mr. Chairperson, we're now slightly confused whether it was Mr. Steyn or Mr. Esterhuizen who said it. We will find that passage, and I will continue then with that question. But whether it was 15% or not, I still want to pursue the issue of the $400 million with this witness.
Did that witness speak about $400 million?
Those figures are in the documents that I think it's in this particular. Advocate,
first, maybe let's just verify the facts before you put the question to the witness.
I have verified the facts. I will just find my reference if the the commission can give me a moment, please.
Okay.
Perhaps I have found the figures, and it was right in front of us. It's still page 222. That's the valuation, including costs, Mr. Chair and Mr. Mbeki, and perhaps Ms. Kane here listening to me. There's the program costs in US dollars in the first column. And one can see that the Hawk is 765 and the Aermacchi 377.7. And we've worked out that the difference between the two is 400 million. I don't know if that solves the problem.
Learned Commissioners, my difficulty pertains to the technical comparison that was being made in the statement that the Hawk had been testified to be 15% better than Aermacchi. I did wonder where that evidence came from, and I stand to be corrected. It wasn't so much in relation to the figures that are on the table before us.
Thank you. I think Mr. Stein is the one who spoke about 15%.
Very well, then perhaps the cross-examiner should proceed, and I'll check that on my own. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Mbeki, it seems that the documents before you shows that the decision to buy the Hawk cost South Africa roughly 2.6 billion rand, more than if we bought the Italian version. Is that correct? And that is at the exchange rate of 6.6 that was used at the time.
If the arithmetic is correct, Chairperson, sure. I don't know. I haven't done any calculations as you may have. So I have no basis to agree or disagree.
But surely this must have been discussed at the time, the huge price difference between the two top contenders, not so?
Chairperson, this matter was discussed yesterday as to what happened with regard to this decision. And I said then, as I repeated today, that there's at no point did the IMC or cabinet take any decision without taking into account cost. The legal representative representing defense explained even this thing about uncosted, what it meant. And here was a decision that was taken by the IMC, chairperson. This document is at page 338. It's 338 of that same bundle. That paragraph 11. Stains bundle. I'm told it's Stains bundle. On page 338, and there's paragraph 11. And it says, after a discussion, it was decided by the ministers present that the Hawk option B should be recommended as the preferred option. This decision to recommend the Hawk was based on national strategic considerations for the future survival of the defense aviation sector and the best teaming up arrangements offered by the respective bidders. Strategically important industrial participation programs offered with the best advantage to the state and local industries was also a determining factor in the final recommendations for the preferred bidders per program. That was the decision. And it's what we explained yesterday.
Advocate Fawaz.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm just trying to locate the minute. I was referred to a document, and the page numbers are not the same as the witnesses. The minute he was referring to is also in our bundle of documents, and it starts at, if I'm correct, on page 72 of the bundle. Now, that is a point I would like to raise with you, Mr. Mbeki, and that is the rationale for the decision to buy the Hawks. It says here that the decision to recommend the Hawks was based on national strategic considerations for the future survival of the defense aviation sector. Let's just deal with that. What on earth does that mean?
It relates to the possibilities for the South African defense industry to link up with the British defense industry, whatever industry was connected to the Hawk, which assessment was that it would benefit our industry here. That's what it meant.
When I read Mr. Esterhuis's evidence, it seemed to me that he was saying that particular paragraph meant that Denel would get a lot more work from the BAE if the Hawk is chosen than they would normally get if the Aermacchi is chosen. Do you know that was his evidence?
What clearly, if he said that, he's only adding a detail to what I've just said. That our defense industry here, as referred to in this paragraph, would benefit from this and that. And Denel is part of that.
Mr. Mbeki, I think you misunderstood me. I'm not saying that he confirmed that. He said that this particular paragraph means, and what was discussed, is that the dip would be to the benefit of Denel if Hawk was chosen and not Aermacchi. And that's what I'm asking you. He didn't say it's correct. He said that was the discussion at the time and the thought at the time in the committee. And I want you to confirm that his version of the events is correct.
What I'm confirming, Chairperson, is the decision that was taken by the Ministerial Committee as I've just read it.
Well, according to Mr. Esterhuis's evidence, if I understand it correctly, that rationale actually wasn't correct. And he showed in his evidence that if one has regard to the two different propositions, that actually if South Africa bought the Aermacchi, Denel would have been in a much better position than vis-a-vis the Hawk. What is your comment on that?
Well, I'm talking about what the Ministerial Committee decided. Officials might have made all manner of recommendations to the Ministerial Committee, and the Ministerial Committee was perfectly at liberty to decide which recommendation to accept or not. And if what the official that referred to said something contrary to what was actually decided, it means obviously the logic of it is that the Ministerial Committee would not have accepted his advice.
Mr. Mbeki, I'm putting facts to you, not opinions. And the fact of the matter is that the Ministerial Committee made a decision and gave a reason for that decision that now transpires not to be correct. And that's what I'm putting to you.
You say it's not correct because an official says it's not correct. On what? Why should we accept that of what the official says? Because you agree with it, therefore it is correct. Well, I can't understand the logic of that.
I will leave that as a question of argument, Mr. Mbeki, but I'm giving you the opportunity to make a comment or to comment on that. If the facts given by the official is found...
Advocate DeForce, he has answered that. Let's get to the next point. It says that is the opinion of the official. They took their own decision.
Mr. Chairperson, I'm putting facts to the witness that my clients will say has already been given evidence about before this commission. And all I'm asking this particular witness is to give his comments on if this commission found those facts to be correct, on whether the decision they made was the correct decision or not. That's all. And I submit I'm entitled to ask him that and to ask him to answer me properly.
Okay, he can answer, but then I thought he has already answered. If you want to put the question again, Mr. Mbeki, do you mind to answer that question again?
What I've said, Chairperson, which I'm repeating myself, is that the official might have made whatever presentation he might have wanted to present to the committee. The committee took its decision as I've just read it. If the official's proposal is contrary to what was agreed by the committee, obviously, therefore, logically, it means the committee did not accept that.
The question is actually why, but I will leave it at that. I understand that you do not want to answer that question in the way I'm putting it to you. At the same particular meeting, Mr. Mbeki, there was another decision made, and that was the question of the grippins. Now, I just want to find that passage. I have to refer you again to Mr. Naidu's evidence. As you previously said that you align yourself with the evidence given on behalf of the government, and he's one of the officials that was involved in the process. Now, according to his statement that he handed in at this commission and gave evidence on, there was, after consultations with the Chief of the Air Force, Chief of the Navy, and Chief of the SANDF and the Minister of the Defense on the need of the defense equipment, the timing of these needs, and alternative approaches, a certain list of priorities were drawn up. This list was the following, and all that is important here for purposes of my questioning is the question of the alpha, which said not required immediately. He then goes on to deal with that requirement, and he says the following. At the time of the negotiations, the Air Force had 50 supersonic Cheetah fighter aircraft, including 12 dual passenger Cheetah aircraft, which had recently had a midlife upgrade. These aircraft are able to operate until 2012. We're now talking about 1999 or 1998. With regard to trained pilots for supersonic aircraft, the NT understood there were insufficient trained personnel to absorb the Gripen aircraft should these be supplied earlier than the time required. Now, in the back, if you take this as the backdrop, what happened was that the discussion surrounding the affordability of the Gripen then dealt with the possibility of tranching. Can you remember that this was the situation?
The chairperson, honestly, we are being asked to do an impossible thing. To remember this kind of detail of something that happened 15, 16 years ago. It's difficult. It's difficult for me I do not have that kind of capacity to recollect.
Mr. Mbeki, I will then remind you of what was discussed. According to Mr. Naidu, the recommendation of the negotiation team was to seek a deferment of the Gripen procurement on terms and conditions practical and favorable to the government. However, in response to this, the BAE SAB indicated that they were not interested in this, and they then proposed an alternative proposal. A full transaction of the supply of 24 Hawks and 28 Gripen, with the first delivery of 12 Hawk aircraft and the dual-seater Gripen aircraft, and an option to the South African government to cancel on the supply of the remaining Hawk aircraft, followed by another option to cancel on the single-seater Gripen aircraft. Does this ring a bell?
Chairperson, our then Minister of Defense, Mr. Lekota, dealt with this matter. And I have no view about it different from what he said. Thanks.
Mr. Mbeki, you were part of the decision-making process. The government decided to buy Gripens at the time, which, from what I've read to you, they didn't need, in a process that really did not allow them to cancel the second and third deliveries. I'm not even going to go through that evidence. The evidence was before this court and it was unchallenged. Before this commission and it was unchallenged. You were part of the decision to, in spite of that, buy the Gripens. And that, after you've given evidence before this commission, that there was a careful balancing between the needs of the Defence Force and the socio-economic needs of South Africa. And I submit, and I'm asking you, to explain the thinking of the government at the time. Why was it so important to get Hawks for $400 million more, and to get Gripen and whatever for an enormous amount of money if we didn't need it at the time? That's all the people want to know.
Chairperson.
Just hold on. You know, Already Fosu made such a long statement. I'm not quite sure what the question is. You made various propositions. Can you break them down into smaller propositions so that we can also follow?
Mr. Chairperson, I submit that Mr. Mbeki is fully capable of answering my long question. I'm going to ask him to do that.
I must also understand it, because I'm the one who's going to write the report at the end of the day. I must make the findings. Just asking you to do it so that I can also understand it.
Mr. Mbeki, you indicated to this commission that you cannot remember this far back. I've now given you a background to the question of Tranching, and I want to ask you, why was it necessary, in view of the fact that South Africa wasn't immediately in need of the Gripens, to buy it at the time, at an immense cost?
Earlier, as she put this question, Chairperson, she also added again the matter of the Hawk and this 400 million and so on. And I was going to say, with regard to the matter of the Hawk, I've explained that and read out the decision of the cabinet on this particular matter. There's no other government explanation about it. With regard to, I'm saying that with regard to the second matter that she's raising about the Gripen and so on, I'm saying then Minister of the Interministerial Committee and Cabinet, then Minister of Defense, dealt with this thing and answered it, and I have no different opinion about it or information or any other thing different from that. I don't understand why the insistence that I must repeat what Mr. Lekota said. Why the insistence? This evidence given by Mr. Lekota, surely, Chairperson, is on the record of the Commission. And the Deputy Minister, Ron Castles, of Defense, then Deputy Minister of Defense. I have no information or opinion or anything else different from what they said.
Mr. Mbeki, first of all, Mr. Lekota wasn't present when the decision was made, so he couldn't give any evidence on this particular point. That's the first problem that we have here. And the responsibility does not fall on the Deputy Minister, it falls on the ministers, as I understand it. That's why I'm asking you this particular question.
No, I will explain. You were not in government, we were in government. Deputy Minister of Defense then, Ron Castles, participated in the work of the IMC. That's what happened in government. Whatever your understanding of how government works, that's what happened. And I have no doubt that when Minister Likota became minister, indeed he became very familiarized with what had been happening in the department. There's no minister who starts being a minister required to remember only the things that happened since she was there. Of course he would have been familiarized with everything that the department was doing, including this acquisition, and therefore perfectly competent to comment. He would have to be competent to happen on decisions that were taken before he got there. So the fact that he came later and might not have participated in whatever meeting, it doesn't take away the possibility for him to know about these departmental things. Signed the contracts. What contracts was he signing? Thanks.
Mr. Mbeki, maybe you misunderstand the reason for your appearance here. The idea, and I think you said that in your original statement, is to assist this commission in its investigation. Now, to refer to a minister who wasn't present when an important decision that's being questioned and criticized by certain people were made, is not an answer to my question. And I'm going to explain to you why it is important that you explain to this commission why the Interministerial Committee recommended to Cabinet that the Gripen should be bought as well as the Hawk, both of them being manufactured by the BAE. I'm going to explain to you why this is important. I want to refer you to the investigations of the Can I ask the question? Okay. In the United States investigated BAE, and there was a discussion about it yesterday, BAE and SAB. I just want our... In connection, inter alia, with their South African dealings, and I have to explain to you that my clients will come and give evidence to this commission that deals with the two U.S., well, first the plea bargaining dealt with in 2010. I don't want to bore you with the detail, and that the second one was in 2011. But what is more important is that, rightly or wrongly, and we submit that our clients will be able to prove to this commission that those two investigations clearly shows that there was unauthorized commissions paid in order for the BAE to land the South African Hawk and Gripen contracts. And I just want to refer you to our submissions we made to this commission, and I'm going to read a short part of it to you, and then I'm going to ask you to comment. They deal with both of the plea bargaining documents and then say, while South Africa was not explicitly mentioned in the plea bargain documents in the US in 2010, it was certainly implicit in the settlement as relayed to Mr. Feinstein by an officer of the US government agency involved in the investigation. But more importantly, in addition, South Africa featured quite clearly in another plea bargain that BAE Systems agreed to in 2011. This time, the company settled a civil action brought by the U.S. State Department around a different set of offenses. Here, it admitted guilt in return for a fine of $70 million for violating a number of U.S. regulations. In particular, BAE admitted to numerous violations of U.S. international traffic in arms regulations. These violations included unauthorized brokering of U.S. defense article and services, causing unauthorized brokering, failure to register a broker, failure to file annual broker reports, and failure to report to the payment of fees or commissions associated with the defense transactions. And then the department concluded conducted a further review of the Gripen aircraft transaction and identified a license issued by the Department of Justice in June of 2002. The license included negative certification. In other words, BAE certified that they've not paid fees and commissions for them to export these. It then turned out that the license, which was part of a broader transaction involving 1.6 million pounds worth of Hawk aircraft, partly to South Africa. The United States Department came to the conclusion that based on information obtained by the department, the respondent or its representative, Red Diamond, made payments to brokers involved in securing the sale to South Africa, and the respondent failed to disclose those payments. So based on this, do you understand why people are questioning the decision in spite of the elements that show to some people clearly that the idea of buying the Hawk and the Gripen was not such a good idea, seems suspicious. And by this, I'm not saying that government or the ministers or anybody had anything to do with it. It may be that there was a manipulation of facts, but the fact of the matter is we sit here and the BAE has admitted that they've paid commissions, and we can call it commissions, but clearly that's not allowed. Let's call it what it is, bribes, in connection with this transaction. What do you say about this?
Chair, I've listened with interest to the long preamble to the question, but I do not see what the relevance of it to the particular witness is, particularly when there's no indication as to who paid bribes or commissions to whom. That would be the kernel of it. There's a long story about plea bargains, etc., but we do not know what the allegation is, or who paid whom unlawfully. Would be interested in that, particularly if it has a bearing on the bribery of the president, deputy president, or a minister, or any of the people in the IMC. That has not come. It's just a vague allegation. I think we have to be specific here, Chair.
Maybe let me just find out from the former president. Do you know anything about this American investigation?
No, I don't, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you.
May I intervene at this point, Mr. Commissioner?
Just hold on. You had a chance yesterday. Let's first finish with the Lawyers for Human Rights. Yeah, yes, Advocate for.
Chairperson, the relevance of the question is simply what is the comment, because the problem that we're facing is that there seems to have been a choice made by Cabinet for a preferred bidder under circumstances that raises questions. And I've raised the questions with the witness. And then afterwards we come across the fact that at least as far as let's accept my proposition is correct. At least as far as the United States are concerned, certain commissions that was unauthorized were paid. I'm asking this witness whether he has any knowledge about why, under these circumstances, the Gripens and Hawks were chosen.
Maybe let's restrict the question to the South African situation. He knows nothing about the American investigation. I want to suggest that let your questions be restricted to the SDPPs that we're investigating, because he has knowledge of that, but then he says he has no knowledge of what happened in America. Maybe restrict the question to the South African situation.
First of all, Mr. Chair, I can take you to where South Africa is mentioned in the documentation, but let's rather leave that for my clients to do. But I've asked Mr. Mbeki to explain why South Africa chose to buy Gripens at a time when we didn't need them. And I've given him the references to that evidence. He hasn't given an answer to that question. He keeps on saying, why do I have to answer it, or somebody else has answered on my behalf? But it is a legitimate question. It's a legitimate worry? And I would like him to answer that question, then I can move on.
Chairperson, the advocate wants to insist that this is a Mbeki question. It's not a Mbeki question, it's a government question. And government has answered this question. And I've said that there's no other information, additional information I can supply the Commission on this matter, additional to what people who spoke on behalf of the IMC and government, beyond what they said. With regard to this second matter, question is asked, in the light of these findings in the United States about commissions and plea bargains and all of that, why did you buy the Gripen? I'm quite sure that whatever happened in the United States happened after these decisions were taken. Whatever discoveries made about commissions, whether they are bribes or whatever, surely was before the decisions that we made. But if it wasn't, certainly this is not a matter that ever came to our attention that there was this particular problem. But in the end, what this point that Advocate Marane is making, I'd like to come back to this question, Chairperson. That the people who I'm talking about are the people who sat on the Ministerial Committee and Cabinet. Indeed, I don't want to dispute whatever might have been found in the United States, that BAE Systems paid some commission to somebody. The question that arises for us is there any evidence? And really, I would very much appreciate it if this is produced, because this matter has been up in the air for 16 years, 15, that as a result of whatever BAE Systems did in terms of commission, or anybody else did in terms of paying commissions, that process resulted in corrupting the members of the IMC and the cabinet. And indeed, if this allegation, this point can be made and proved, this would be enormously helpful, because then we can deal with this factual thing, that the BAE Systems paid a commission to somebody, and they were coming back, it seems, Chairperson, to what was debated yesterday, and you are correctly saying the words bribe and commission are not synonymous, and I said this, my own view is the same, but again, we're back there. But even if they were synonymous, what impact did they make on these two principal committees from whom the decisions came? I think that becomes the critical element. But the question that was posed was, in the light of what happened in the United States, why this? I'm saying certainly, I can't recall at any point that anybody came to this matter, came to the notice of the IMC or cabinet, that there were some findings in the States about BAE Systems and so on. I don't recall that happening.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt my learned friend. I did ask for an opportunity to intervene in this aspect because I want to remind the Commission that yesterday my client gave an undertaking to the Commission to find for the Commission the very document which has now been produced by Lawyers for Human Rights. We'd like to be excused from having to do that little chore, and we'd also like to remind both the witness and the Commission that in the papers before the Constitutional Court, which gave rise to these proceedings and to which reference was made yesterday, there is evidence on oath by a scorpion called Deploy, covering 160 pages, which makes it very clear that bribes were paid.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. We are aware of the evidence of Mr. Deploy. Probably is going to be one of the witnesses that we are going to call. But then thanks a lot. We are aware of that information.
Are we excused then from going to the trouble of producing a document which is now coming in anyway in this bundle, please?
Thank you. You're excused. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It saves us effort and trouble to find it.
Thank you.
Mr. Mbeki, on the question of commissions and bribes, I just want to remind you, and you obviously won't be able to remember, that on the 4th of September 2008, in a question and answer situation, I think it was obviously in Parliament, the question, no, where was this? May I have a moment just to get my facts right? I think I've got the facts now. It was referred to yesterday. It was a press briefing by Minister in the Presidency, Minister Pahat, and Minister of Public Enterprises, then Minister Irwin. And it is dated, if I may just find the date, the 6th of August 2008, and it's called a full briefing on the arms matter. And just in relation to the question of commissions, I'm going to put it to you that there can be no argument that the commissions that was paid in the BAE deal, that was found to be paid in the BAE deal by the United States of America, were regarded as bribes. And not only that, even the South African government acknowledged that commissions paid under these circumstances can be called bribes, and I'm going to read to you the question and the answer given at this particular briefing. Can arms purchases ever be negotiated without kickbacks? And here one has in mind previous controversies and alleged kickbacks in other countries. The answer was, it is known in the arms industry that commissions can be mere camouflage for bribes and kickbacks. And I want to ask you whether you now accept that if there's reference to commissions in the context of this commission, we are actually talking about bribes and that the government knew it at the time.
Chairperson, the BAE systems may have commissioned somebody to persuade the decision makers to take particular decisions in favor of BAE systems. What BAE systems would have paid the person who would facilitate the purchase of their goods is not a person who is being bribed, is being paid a commission, perhaps to carry out the act of bribery. In this instance, if a minister is a member of, if the chair of the IMC was the best person with whom BAE systems were in contact to encourage IMC to take particular decisions, for instance, over the Hawk, and they paid the chair of the IMC, that would be a bribe. But somebody who has no decision-making powers in this process, but has the possibility to persuade the decision-makers to take particular decisions, the person in between will be paid a commission. And the person paid the commission would pay a bribe. And that is why it's important that we should be precise about this matter, Chairperson. Because I'm saying that certainly from the position of our government, then, we're very interested that these allegations that we made need to be dealt with. And the only way you can deal with them is that the people who make the allegations, presumably because they've got the facts, that they must produce the facts. Then it becomes possible to act on this thing. Commissions paid, yes indeed, commissions might very well have been paid by BAE systems. Did they corrupt? Were they passed on as bribes? Maybe the US system found that this had happened, maybe. But I'm saying the mere fact of paying a commission to somebody who's commissioned to go into whatever is not a bribe to that person. It becomes a bribe when the person who's a decision maker is then bought in order to take particular decisions. It may very well be that the US process about BAE systems discovered that these people were paid those commissions, then bribed whoever. It may very well be that that's what happened. I'm not familiar with the report.
Mr. Mbeki, are you saying that if BAE paid money that wasn't due in terms of a contract to an official or a person who's not a minister, who had a role to play in the arms deal, that wasn't a bribe?
I'm saying a person who is asked to facilitate a particular business agreement. You, Miss So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so, know Judge Seriti very well. I need Judge Seriti to take a particular decision. I will give you this money, one, for the services that you are going to render, and two, for the money you are going to use to buy him. That's what I'm saying. And then indeed this person comes, who knows Judge Seriti, and sits with him, and unfortunately fails, because Judge, he would fail. I have no doubt about this. To bribe Judge Seriti must go back and to say to the person who gave the money, look, I can't move him. And so I, who gave the money, will then say, okay, return to me the money you could not use as a bribe. And of course, you couldn't keep the money that I gave you for the work that you did. And as I understand it, normally that kind of commission is normally not hidden necessarily, because it's not illegal. It's kind of normal business practice, not just with regard to the defense industry. People, consultants, it might be called consultants, and so on, brokers. It's a normal business practice. The bribing occurs when that consultant, broker, then goes and buys the decision maker. That's a bribe. And I'm saying it may very well be that the US process identified these persons were bribed here. And it indeed would be very, very good if the people who make the allegations, or if the documents are from the US, they help us to identify these people who are bribed. Not people who have paid commissions, people who are bribed, because then we are able to act on this. It really would be very, very important. Because we've had to live with these allegations for a decade and a half. And each time you say, okay, let's then, the people who make the allegations, please just give us the something on the basis of which law enforcement or whatever can then act on the bribery bit, not on who was paid commission to go and canvass to say that, the best shoe seller in the world Thabo Mbeki Shoemaker Incorporated, a salesman. That's what advocate I understand by what is meant by between commissions and bribes.
Mr. Commissioner, I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but it's an appropriate moment at which to draw the attention of the Commission to Clause 20 of the BAE contract, which is the clause that tells us about what bribes are in the context of this agreement. Clause 20 is called the remedies in case of bribes clause. And the other aspect of this agreement...
Thank you, Advocate Hoffman.
You've got that, I'm sure.
We are aware of that clause. We are aware of that.
The only other quick point I want to make is that you will search in vain, everybody will search in vain, for a reference to the payment of commissions in this agreement.
Thank you. Thank you. Advocate Foss?
May I proceed, Mr. Chair? Mr. Mbeki, the point I was trying to make, and I think you're assisting me somewhat in that, is that let's assume that the bribes that were, or the commissions that were paid by BAE resulted in the cabinet choosing the Hawks and the Gripens above other equally good choices. Then obviously the commission becomes a bribe. That is what you've been saying. Is that correct?
No. The person paid the commission may indeed may very well have very persuasive argument about the value of this product. A persuasive argument is not a bribe.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can I, Advocate Foss, just repeat your question? It appears to me that we are talking past each other. Okay, can you just repeat the question if you don't mind?
Mr. Mbeki, the issue is this: once that now that we know that there are these allegations made by the United States, clearly that's an issue for this commission to investigate, because that forms part of their mandate, and that you agree with, not so?
Sure, I agree. If it's in the mandate, of course.
The reason why the BAE deal is being questioned is simply this: we did not need the Gripens at the time, and we bought Hawks for $400 million more than we could have paid for something basically equally as good. And that's what is raising the eyebrows. And I'm asking you to comment on that.
But I've answered that question, Chairperson. What arose later was this matter about the plea bargain, and indeed I am told it's dated 2011, this plea bargain, long after we'd concluded all of these things about this acquisition. What issue that arose later was, in the light of what has happened with regard to this plea bargain, what justifies the purchase of this? So I was saying that, as far as I recall, we did not know anything of this at the time that the decisions were made. And as I say, then transpires that this plea bargain is then dated some month. Is it May? In May 2011.
Mr. Mbeki, my clients will give evidence, and it will be argued on their behalf that the decision to purchase the Gripens and the Hawks was not rational, given the facts before this commission. But I'm going to let that be. Can we perhaps turn to the question of the submarines and competitive quotes? Sorry, I've just been reminded that my clients want me to ask you about the light utility helicopters and the competitive quotes on that, not the submarines. The selection of the Augusta as the preferred bidder to supply the light utility helicopters under the SDP was based on a tender for 60 helicopters. Do you remember that?
Chair, the witness is being asked certain details which relate to specifics of particular tenders. The issue of the tenders has been dealt with by other witnesses. And the witness will obviously not be in a position to deal with the nitty-gritty of each particular acquisition. The IMC did not deal with the nitty-gritty. IMC recommended certain matters to Cabinet. Cabinet took an in-principle decision that the acquisitions must be must go ahead. I don't think it is fair to ask this particular witness these nitty-gritties.
Mr. Chairperson, I was going to interfere. I'm not going to ask about nitty-gritty, and perhaps I put the wrong wording to the question. I shouldn't have asked whether Mr. Mbeki can remember it. I'm just giving him facts that has already been testified on, so perhaps I'll just rephrase that. Mr. Mbeki, I'm not asking you to remember about whether there was 60 or 30 or how many helicopters. The fact of the matter is the tender process that was put into place was for 60 helicopters. And after that process, there was a re-evaluation of the bids, and the decision was taken that only 30 helicopters will be need to be acquired. Now, the question is this, and I'm going to put it to you: there wasn't a re-evaluation or a re-request for tenders after that decision was made, and my clients will argue that that doesn't necessarily, if you buy 30 helicopters instead of 60, it doesn't necessarily mean that the price would be the same, because there may be factors that will influence the tender process, and that the committee should have asked for new tenders after the decision was made to slash the helicopters from 60 to 30. That's the question.
I'm sorry. If my recollection is correct, the initial tender was 60 or 40. Say that 60 or 40, but then at the end of the day, because of the decision of the Interministerial Committee, they end up taking 30. One of the witnesses testified in detail about that. I think he said that, they said 60 or 40, but then at the end they end up placing for 30 and not for 40.
Mr. Commissioner, my instructions are that Mr. Ferreira Colonel Ferreira gave evidence. I'm not sure about the 40. I'll have to take instructions on that. Thank you. I'll leave it then for the moment at that. Mr. Commissioner, I see it's a few minutes before 1 o'clock. I'm going to ask, there is a possibility that I may finalize my questioning in about another half an hour or so. That I'm not sure if we need to take the whole adjournment or...
Can I suggest that we take a 10 to 15 minutes break, and then we come back. And then what I intend doing is that once you finish cross-examining Mr. Mbeki, we want to deal with your application to recall Mr. Erwin and try and see if we can finalize the arrangements today.
Thank you, Chair.
Advocate Moran, will that be in order?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Then maybe let's adjourn for about 15 minutes or so. Thank you.